Okay. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining our breakout 3.4 session this afternoon. Today we're going to be discussing the role of social research in supporting policy change and in patient adoption of new technologies. So just to start, there's a few breakout session housekeeping. You've probably been through this before. So I mentioned that we're live streaming today. So our virtual platform will be available later to listen to again, or to those that couldn't be with us today. We'll pause when there's a session break, and the breakout sessions won't have interpretation features. But what I will say is that we're going to engage our online audience through a couple of questions and the use of a Menti board to gather their feedback. So everyone in the room will be able to use that, as will those online. So I'm Sally Kinraid. I'm project leader at Medicines Development for the Onco and LF program with moxidectin. We have a great deal of interest in this particular session because of where we're at with our new treatment. But today we've got a fantastic range of speakers who will talk about bringing to the fore new technologies, vaccines, diagnostics and medicines. Starting with Dr. Alison Krentel, who's Associate Professor at the University of Ottawa, and she will be kicking us off today. After that, Elena Marban-Castro from FIND will be talking about diagnostics introduction. Dr. Margaret Giapong from the University of Health and Allied Sciences Health Research Unit, and she will be talking about access and delivery pathways for a new vaccine. Unfortunately, Dr. Hadley Matatendero Sultani couldn't be with us today, and so he's recorded a session to show. And then we'll take a break, and after that, Ashley Preston will also be presenting online, and she works with Unlimit Health, talking about access to the paediatric praziquantel. She works with the Paediatric Praziquantel Consortium. And finally, Dr. Sabina Specht, who is a filariasis, head of the filariasis strategy and clinical development group at DNDi, but she will be talking to us today about the introduction of fexinidazole for HAT. So I guess, why did we think this session was important? We're particularly here to learn from the experiences of others and how social research can contribute to access and adoption. And I think we've heard a lot about social research in the last few sessions, certainly the ones I've been in, particularly around experiences with introducing IDA for the treatment of LF, and also to understand why people participating in PC-NTD programs, or certainly the ones that don't participate and never get treated. So I think, there's a lot of learnings from the social research, and in this situation we're interested in how it helps to bring a new treatment into use. And we want to know how do we go about incorporating it into our research programs at a time that makes sense, and that it isn't always something that stands alone but should be incorporated as part of bringing a new technology forward. I guess we tend to underestimate the importance and value of the problems that could occur, and so I think having a better understanding of how routine use and scale-up of interventions may be affected by what we do or don't do. We want to ensure our products be implemented successfully, and that acceptability is also considered for, particularly when you're anticipating that your new treatment needs to be included in a WHO guideline. It's certainly a required component. And I've just got this little slide up here about the second valley of death. So you know about product development and how there's attrition along the way as you develop a product, and you may only bring 1 in 1,000 to the fore. But actually, access and uptake are very much part of where a new product can fall down if we don't do it well. So just to remind you of the schedule for today, there'll be 4 presentations first, then a break, a couple of presentations afterwards, and then we're going to have breakout discussions. And as part of that, I'd like you to keep in your mind, as active thinkers and contributors later, that what we want to discuss are the barriers to policy change and country adoption of new technologies, or barriers to acceptability and uptake in communities, And then, are there innovative ways that we could implement and amplify the social science to support introduction? So please think about those. Think about any experiences you've had in introducing a new treatment or a new diagnostic, and we'll listen well to all of the speakers. So I'll hand over now to Alison. Thanks, Alison, to talk about community acceptability in new treatments.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for inviting me to be part of this session. So I'm going to talk about specifically considering community acceptability in new treatments. So I want to frame my remarks today along this pathway, and it comes from the Access and Delivery Partnership, and where we see particularly the intersection of community acceptability, so along health technology assessment, at the level of health service delivery, and at the patient or individual level. And those are particularly areas where we would see the importance of measuring and understanding community acceptability in a new treatment. When we bring a new treatment into the community, we're bringing it into a complex context. And this is taken from the WHO TDR Implementation Research Toolkit. And it just illustrates some of the different factors that are part of this context. So cultural, political, physical factors around access, stakeholders, socioeconomic. These are just some of the elements of that context where we bring a new treatment into play. When we think specifically about the health system, when we bring an efficacious treatment into the health system at different points along this pathway, it loses its effectiveness. So whether there's lack of access or inadequate access, whether the accuracy of how it's targeted and given to people is not optimal, do the providers actually use the treatment as it should be used? Are they delivering it in the way that it should be used? And then finally, are those consumers or individuals using it in such a way that it's intended to be used? And so that each of the ways along the health system, we can lose effectiveness. And so we want to understand acceptability so that we can try and prevent some of this loss along the way. So when we think about introducing a new intervention, these are just some of the questions that somebody might ask themselves. And when we think most recently for all of us in the room about the introduction of the new COVID-19 vaccine, maybe these are questions you might have asked yourself, or members of your family or your friends or your neighbors may have asked you. Is it safe? Is it really necessary? Is it going to work? These are questions that are very human questions. And so when we think about trying to understand acceptability, we're trying to answer some of these questions along that pathway so that we can ensure that the rollout is successful. So when we think about the way we look at NTDs, in a lot of ways, we focused a lot on the biomedical approach, the provision of mass drug administration, prevention of disability. We've invested a lot in the R&D of new treatments and diagnostics. But over time, I would say in the evolution of our programs, we've increasingly paid more attention to those social determinants of health. And even at COR-NTD, we hear more about WASH, we hear more about health systems, we hear more about social research. And this is really the adoption of more of a social determinants of health approach. And we understand that treatment alone isn't going to address all of our issues, that we need to think more widely about social determinants of health. And this is really where acceptability sits very comfortably, is understanding the acceptability of new treatments and interventions. So we used, in the research that we have done around acceptability, we use this definition, which is the fairly common definition. It is not taken from the health field per se, but it's a multifaceted construct that reflects the extent to which people delivering or receiving a healthcare intervention consider it to be appropriate based on anticipated or experienced cognitive and emotional responses. And so some of the elements of the acceptability of an intervention, in this case a new treatment, are seen here. And if you can draw them back a little bit to some of those questions that people may have when given a new treatment. Things around perceived benefits, side effects, does it align with my value system? Is it convenient to use? These are just some of the elements that we want to think about when considering the acceptability of a new treatment. We've seen a growing importance of acceptability over time. And this is just an example from the Medical Research Council in the UK guidance document in 2000, makes no reference at all to acceptability, but 15 years later we see that there's more mention of it. And so certainly we've seen a growing influence and need to look at acceptability, and obviously, as Sally mentioned, with the WHO now including that as part of the guidelines review committee review process, we know that it's also very important and essential. It's also important when we consider patient-centered access to health care, and it's right at the center here. Is the new treatment going to be acceptable to patients? And so it's also part of having a more patient-centered approach to our NTD programs and new treatments. So there are different places along the pathway that we can consider adding an acceptability element in a development. So at the clinical trial stage, there's an opportunity to make some initial assessments on acceptability. Later at the community-based safety studies, which we had our experience in DOLF and the IDA programs. The rollout then at the pilot districts is another opportunity to test and assess acceptability, and then using it as part of routine monitoring over time. And so these are just some of the places where we've been involved in including that acceptability element to understand, particularly for IDA at the community-based studies, and then as part of the rollouts. And we're also using it in as a routine monitoring tool in one area in Mali, and then with moxidectin now in Ghana and Angola. So we use, and many of you have seen this before, so I won't spend too much time on this, but we use a 9-statement indicator. This is adapted from an existing indicator developed in educational interventions, and it allows you to calculate a composite score for acceptability, and it gives us an opportunity to measure over time changes of acceptability. In some of the research that we've done in the IDA community-based trials, and then in subsequent rollouts in Guyana and PNG, you can see just the range of different scores. The threshold is set at 22.5, which is the midpoint. This is not an arbitrary, this is based in the literature, but it allows us to capture over time what acceptability is, to understand how it relates also to coverage, particularly in rollouts. You can also add a qualitative assessment, which is really important. And these are just some of the qualitative methods that you want to use, but it helps to validate and understand that quantitative measure that you have, and allows you to dig deep and understand more what your measure is telling you. And this is really where we start to understand questions around number of pills, for example, or fears of side effects, or where you're able to dig in more to the acceptability of that treatment. So what have we learned? Just a couple of slides on this. Acceptability is very context dependent. It depends on the number of interventions. In this case, previous MDA rounds, for example. Is it an urban or rural environment? What are the general healthcare access points? We see in areas, for example, where there's very poor healthcare access, sometimes the acceptability of a new treatment is much higher because they're just glad that someone's bringing treatment to them. And so we see some variation also across healthcare access. We see a consistent, within LF, consistent association between never treatment and low acceptability scores. We've also seen some spatial relationships, so where you have clusters of people who are more highly acceptable versus clusters of people that are maybe have lower acceptability. And this is probably related to the distribution and maybe even the CDD that's bringing the treatment to them in the community rollouts. We know that the mixed methods research is the most valuable. So we can collect that quantitative measure, which is really important, and it provides a place to track from. But really it's that qualitative that allows us to understand more and to provide recommendations to programs in the rollout, et cetera. So a final slide here on what we have learned. Routine measurement helps over time. it also helps to inform the health workforce training. So giving them a sense of what are the concerns that community members might be having. With IDA, we were worried about the additional number of pills. This turned out to not be a very big deal. So it was very reassuring to be able to say in our research, we showed that this wasn't really a very big deal because we explained to people why you needed to take 9 pills or 10 pills or whatever it was. And so that kind of research can really help also in training the health workforce. Pilot research with acceptability, so in these community-based safety trials, is really important to have the acceptability built in. What we found in IDA was that once the community-based studies were done, there were a lot of questions about how to roll it out and concerns. And so being able to reassure at that level was really important and allowed countries that were willing to take the uptake of IDA, they were able to move forward immediately with some of the recommendations that came out of those safety, community-based safety studies. Achieving acceptability requires intervention both on the delivery and recipient side. We can't just consider community acceptability at the individual level without thinking about that health workforce and how do we help them to be more professional, to have the answers to the questions they need, to have the supportive supervision that they need. And so when we think about acceptability, it needs to also include the delivery component as well. And then obviously, it's important because you have to have it for the guideline development process. It is a component that is there. So when we think about new treatments, new interventions being developed at different points along the pathway, including that acceptability research will be very important. So my very last slide, and I see the stop very clearly in front of me. If I leave you with one thought, if you build it, they will come. We think that, but really if it's not acceptable, they won't. And so really finding those places along the pathway where you can look at acceptability through quantitative or qualitative measures so that you can help to get that new product to communities in a way that they will use it. So thank you very much.
Hello, can you hear me? Yeah. Okay, so I'm Elena Marvan, I'm working at FIND, and I'm talking about capturing end users' insights, evidence to inform diagnostic development, normative policy, and use. So my presentation is very much alike the previous presentation. So when we're thinking about acceptability or any other questions that we want to address with the communities, most of the times we are developing a diagnostic tool, then we are producing the normative policies and the implementation in country, and then we are doing these studies about acceptability if people in the community find it useful. But we really need to engage in an early stage the communities that would be the ones using these tools. And we are not only talking about the potential patients or just people that might use a diagnostic, but also the healthcare workers and the laboratory staff that might be the ones manipulating the diagnostic. So when we're talking about NTDs, we are really, this term includes social, cultural, political experiences and behaviors. So we need to talk about the social determinants of health, and it's not possible to address any NTDs just from a biomedical perspective. So this is why it's important to include social sciences since the beginning. So from the operational and implementation research unit at FIND, we developed different types of studies that could be from formative assessments, which could be a quick community consultation, into formative research, where we study the values and preferences of the communities we'll be working with, or participatory action research, demonstration studies or pilots once we already have a diagnostic, but we really want to see how to implement it and what is the best optimized model that we can use to integrate it into the healthcare system or even in non-healthcare places. Mixed methods studies that could include an intervention or not, and qualitative studies that could be exploratory since these very early stages of diagnostic development into later stages. And all of these could integrate qualitative or mixed methods, interviews, surveys, with different types of end users. So our key elements of operational implementation research are these ones: pragmatism. So we are always flexible to adapt to new contexts, to tailor specific approaches, and to be flexible in our design. So we never try to do a protocol and to be following it always from the start to the end, but we need to be flexible to optimize the delivery models and to see if this is changing, listening to the participants and integrating these focus group discussions and other social sciences methodologies within the study itself. Because we always want to have an application to the real world. We want to gather real world data that would be interesting for the programmatic and operationalization at the policy level later. So there are different case studies that FIND has been working on, and it could be from formative research to usability studies and demonstration studies in different fields. I'm just going to focus in two of them here, from the values and preferences studies on hepatitis C, self-testing, and for self-testing for COVID disease. This has been conducted in the first one in 10 different countries, and for COVID in 8 different countries. And both values and preferences studies have guided or have been used from WHO to include them into the guidelines and recommendations on self-testing. So this is important, like to incorporate these values from the communities into a programmatic further state. And when we're talking about diagnosis, we need to think that this is a complex phenomena. So it includes people's values, behaviors, experiences, perceptions, and many other things. So it's not only a medical consequence that the person will have when it gets diagnosed, but the person will be having many other social phenomena or stigma, and among others. Diagnosis turns illness into disease, and it legitimizes how patients feel about themselves. And we are also thinking about the power of self-diagnosis into empowering communities and individuals, and how this knowledge could be distributed by the different people. So just to highlight, from this book, Social Science Perspective on Global Public Health, there is a very nice framework about the role of social sciences in NTDs that I don't think you can see it here, but you can look at this book, where it talks about the anthropocentric, the food and nutritional insecurity, and many of the other social determinants of health and economic, social health inequalities that we need to consider when we're talking about NTDs. So I'm going to present 2 case studies. The first one is not on NTDs, it's about malaria, but this is a very recent example where we've been incorporating this approach. So as you know, rapid diagnostic tests are essential to increase screening and case detection, but they also present some limitations. Manufacturers are working in non-invasive malaria tools, for example, a hand screening that without even touching your skin could detect malaria in just some seconds. So we are working now to assess the acceptability and feasibility of theoretically non-invasive malaria tools with different end users. And we're talking about, for example, this hand scan. So it might be differently approached by populations if we are scanning a hand or, for example, the feet, and people would take to remove their shoes and their socks in front of others, or if we are talking about saliva-based RDIs or volatile companic compounds where you need to exhale. So we've designed an exploratory qualitative study with semi-structured interviews and focus group discussions with different populations. We are working with key stakeholders in the countries, but also professionals working at borders, because it might be interesting not only to screen people at a healthcare facility, but maybe, for example, at airports in borders, and also children at schools. And we are also trying to include key populations, but also community with the general community. We're including pregnant women, healthcare workers, school staff, among other groups. And this is being done now in Indonesia, Rwanda, and Peru. So trying to take this from this early diagnostic development into asking for the populations if they would be finding it useful. So these results will be shared with the manufacturers, with the stakeholders, with the communities, and with WHO to try to help provide this guidance for development of the TPPs. And the last case study is about schistosomiasis. So as you know, WHO guidelines recommend diagnostic tests that examine stool or urine by microscopy or a questionnaire. So FIND now, in collaboration with WHO and other partners, is leading a consortium to develop and validate one RDT targeting CAA to support national control programs and to monitor the impact of treatment as well as for reassessment mapping. Some years ago, from 2018 to 2019, we developed a study to evaluate the market potential for the launch of RDTs in 30 endemic countries. So this was a mixed methods study conducting interviews, semi-structured interviews with experts in 21 countries and a review of data in 44 countries. And the key results are that people have the desire to have an easy-to-use rapid RDT, that it's cost-effective, that provides quick results, and it has an increased sensitivity and specificity compared with current tools. 35% of interviewees thought about it would be important to allowing anyone to use it with minimal or no training, so we don't need to require specialized staff compared to microscopy. That is one of the current limitations. And one of the most important findings as well is that urine and blood were the preferred sample types of this population. So this is something that manufacturers, policymakers, and key stakeholders need to take into consideration for the next RDTs for schistosomiasis. And that was the end of my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Elena. I just meant to mention that we will take questions at the end of the first 4 talks. So I'll now pass over to Margaret Giapong. Thanks, Margaret.
Thank you very much. So we're in an NTD meeting, but I'm sharing experiences from malaria. And I was happy to hear my colleagues saying, but this is in the spirit of integration and collaboration. So I'll just go through this outline briefly, looking at the breakthrough with malaria vaccines. Already we have 2. And then the rationale for the healthcare utilization study, which is the qualitative evaluation of the introduction of the new malaria vaccines. And then capacity building for access and delivery of new health interventions, and then some contextual issues that came up as we did the evaluation. So this is no news. We had the RTSS malaria vaccine all over the place, all hailed WHO, and there were other groups who are looking forward to having their vaccines come out, and just this year we've had a second malaria vaccine. In 2019, it received authorization to be introduced into 3 countries, Ghana, Kenya, and Malawi. And then, like I said, just this September, we've heard about the new malaria vaccine, a second one. It just tells us that there's no end to the introduction of new health technologies in health systems, and it's going to continue, and we are going to hear about many, many, many more. So at the time we were doing the evaluation for the new malaria vaccine, it was just that one malaria vaccine. And over the 2-year, 3-year period, see the different things that have happened. We didn't expect COVID-19. It came, the vaccines came. We had to think about which ones do we take, where do we get them from, issues around purchasing, procurement, stuff like that. Then in between, I'm talking about contextual issues. Several staff retired, so those who had started at the beginning, some had retired. There were issues about did they hand over properly to others, so some of the capacity that had been built earlier was beginning to fizzle, and you were wondering what is going on, but this is real life. you hit 60 in Ghana, you are gone, and somebody else comes. And whether the person has been involved in it or not, you don't know. My PhD supervisor, Marcel, says you are in the departure lounge and you are just going out. And then we had the malaria vaccine this year. So I'm sure by the time next year comes, we'll have another one for schisto, another one for, and the disease control programs are expected to accept this and roll it into the health system in whichever way they can do it better. So all these new health technologies would have to be rolled through the health system from the national level right down to the community level. The policies are developed at the national level, and they are supposed to be rolled down. The question is, to what extent do the implementation plans that are developed at the national level filter through properly to the lower level? And some of these things affect the uptake and utilization of some of these new health technologies within our health system. So Alison showed some of this. It tells that we've been working together for too long. But for any new product to go into the health system, you have to go along the value chain. And I like the comments the previous speaker talked about, saying that, I mean, we should be talking to each other a bit more. You have those in the lab developing all these new technologies without talking to anybody at the receiving end. So in Ghana, for instance, the darker the tablet or the solution, the more powerful. And then we have a condition, and then you give us pale tablets, and this won't work. It's not powerful enough. So the issue of even color may be a small thing, but important for acceptability of some of these things that we do. In the communities, people love injections. So if you give somebody something oral and say it's a vaccination, I wasn't given an injection when I went to the hospital. Is the person okay? Is the doctor okay? So some of these things are important to consider. I know we are complaining about praziquantel and the taste. And did we consider the children in the beginning and the size? So we have to break it. The children are forced to eat it. And so we need to talk to each other a bit more. We can't just separate people in the lab from those in the community when we are doing stuff. For the RTSS malaria vaccine, the issue of procurement didn't become a problem. The vaccines were brought down, and the country had to use that particular one. But when it came to COVID-19, several came, and they had to make a decision on what to do. So for the RTSS, the issue of distribution and storage, the packaging of the new anti-malarial and how it fits within the EPI system, the cold chain system they have, the fridges they have, the size, will they be able to take it, or all of that. The patients who are receiving it, are they going to take it? Is the timeline acceptable for them? Are the mothers going to take their children for the vaccination or not? And then issues around pharmacovigilance. When they take it and something happens, how do they report what is going on with them? We have a system already, but there are complaints about the fact that the reports don't just come in because of issues of normalization of adverse events following immunization. Then the whole thing about implementation research and research to support whatever delivery is happening at country level is very critical. So there's the Mosquirix, and they didn't pose for this picture. We were in the field and we saw them getting ready to go to the community, and I'm like, this is all they have, and they have to go together, otherwise there's no way they can move. And these are the people who have to take the decisions on how to deliver these new health interventions. So Ghana launched big-time new malaria vaccine at the community level everywhere. And this is how you identify that a child is eligible for the malaria vaccine. So there's the eligibility criteria, and once you establish it, there's a stamp that is put on the health record, so then it's easy for the health worker to identify that this child is eligible, and then they give them their vaccinations. But like Alison showed earlier on, new health interventions that get introduced into the health system face all kinds of challenges. And so for this particular evaluation, using a social science approach, we wanted to make sure that we were doing very serious observation and continuous engagement with the communities to understand what was going on. We needed to make sure that we were doing copious documentation of everything that we saw, because it was very new. Ghana has introduced a lot of vaccines, but this was the first time a brand new vaccine was being introduced into the system. And we had to pay attention to a lot of the contextual complexities, which we miss out when we are doing regular studies. So at the health system and the community level, we were interested in how the vaccine was being implemented at the health system within the context of the EPI program and the dynamics of the implementation. And at the community level, how is it impacting household healthcare utilization? So we're asking ourselves, why are people behaving in a particular way? And what things are happening at the time that the malaria vaccine was being introduced? And we used purely, like I said, qualitative methods. We stayed in the community for the ethnographic immersion for long periods of time, trying to understand the communities. We did community profiling, social mapping, observations, interviews, focus group, anything you can think of. And then we introduced 2 innovations, the pictorial diary to be able to capture adverse events, and then the photo voice to get the innermost feelings of the mothers who are taking their children to the health facilities. We were engaging with primary caregivers, household heads, everybody, the health system at the same time. And then it was a longitudinal approach. So over the period of 2.5 years, we were following these women over time to look at what happened at each stage of them sending their child to the health facility. We targeted our visits to when the doses are given. So we went in 3 waves, and at each wave, we're able to identify when a particular dose for malaria was given. And we were interested in the second and the 4th dose, because the second dose was given on its own without any other vaccinations. And then the last dose was way out of the routine delivery system, and we're wondering if the mothers would take their children. Of course, we heard the rumors about the vaccine. The good thing was that our Director General came out quickly to debunk some of the rumors that were there, so that helped us a lot. And for us, the key thing was the healthcare providers. They were totally, should I say, confused, or they found it difficult to accept some of the things that were being told. These are people who should be educating the mothers, but they themselves were wondering, why is the interval for the last dose so wide? And so we had some health workers whose children were eligible, but they were not giving them the vaccination because they themselves were not clear about what was going on. Why is the efficacy so low? It should be higher so that the children will be protected. They were not sure about its preventive, curative, and all kinds of things. But we used the photo voice, and we got mothers to take pictures of the way they felt when they took their children for the vaccination. Some were persistently positive, some were persistently negative, some were in between. But the one I like most is this one of the scorpion. I mean, where the woman showed a picture of the scorpion, we asked her why. She said she had been bitten by a scorpion. She thought she was going to die slowly. So she felt that when her child cried so badly when the child received the vaccine, she was wondering whether her child was not going to die slowly. And there's no way that she's going to tell you this through routine health service delivery unless we engage with them directly. And then also we had the pictorial diary where we left the diary with the mother and said, if your child experienced anything, let us know. And so they documented anything the child experienced and where they had sent the child to. And we found out that the number of adverse events we had picked was more than 2 or 3 times the number that was picked in the health facilities, because it was normal to have a fever. It was normal to have a rash. But when we left this with the women, they documented every single thing. So the critical contextual issues for us in this study was new staff and the need for continuous refresher training, because people were being transferred, people were being moved around, people were going to school. And then the reorientation of the health workers and the caregivers about the normalization of adverse events following immunization. They were just not documenting things which they felt were normal. Issues around tracing of defaulters, of course, it happens everywhere. And then the rumors about the vaccine and related vaccine hesitancy. But for me, the critical voices that I think need attention are the voices of the mothers who took their children for a healthcare facility. And they're asking critical questions. Why did my child get sick even though the person was vaccinated? You said this is for malaria. I didn't expect my child to be sick. How long will the vaccine stay in the child's system? When she gets to 2 years, will she be injected again till she grows, or will she receive additional doses at a certain point? So all of these we pose back to the program, and these are things that they have to think about even when they are introducing other new vaccines. We shouldn't neglect the voices of the people. I'm being told to stop. Yes, I'll stop. At the end of the day, we have to build the capacity in the health system and at the community level. And there's another piece of work we are doing. We can talk about that over coffee. But we think there's the need to build capacity to facilitate the delivery and uptake of new and improved health interventions in our health systems. And we are working on something, like I said, with the EDCTP, and we are hoping that if the capacity building is done properly, technically, and in terms of implementation research, there will be enhanced access and delivery of new health technologies in Ghana and in other countries, and we don't really need to wait for somebody to come and do it for us. I want to acknowledge all the partners who worked with us. Thank you very much.
So welcome, ladies and gentlemen. I'm really excited to join you, albeit virtually, to discuss a little bit about policy considerations when introducing new interventions to the community. I will be really reflecting on our experience in Kenya when we introduced triple therapy against lymphatic filariasis to accelerate elimination of this disease earlier on, using ivermectin, diethyl carbamazine, and albendazole, as opposed to what we had been using, which was mainly diethyl carbamazine and albendazole. Because of the short duration of time that we have, I will share my slideshow so that we can use it just to navigate this discussion. And then we can be able to maybe proceed from there. So my name is Dr. Sultani Matendechero. I am currently the Deputy Director General for Health in Kenya, previously National NTD Program Manager. So we actually did our baseline mapping for lymphatic filariasis in the year 2000. 15 years later, we conducted a sentinel site survey, which revealed that we still had some very significant levels of prevalence in 2 counties out of the 47 counties in Kenya. One Lamu County, where both sub-counties in Lamu were significantly affected, and in Mombasa County, where one sub-county called Jomvu was significantly affected. So we had to make a decision to go into these 3 sub-counties and, implement triple therapy using IDA. So we really had to look at a range of issues where we needed to consider the policy provisions around it so that we could now be able to go into the community. The first one, of course, was around the safety and efficacy of this new regimen. Simply because this was a new regimen and we wanted to know if it was not only efficacious, but if it was safe to our people. So we relied a lot on data that had been collected earlier to be able to now determine the safety and efficacy data. But then we also came up with the policies on how we will conduct post-administration surveillance, just to make sure that if there are any issues, then we pick them up. A very important area where we had to look at our policies was on community engagement. And this one, we really had to ensure that the kind of strategy we are using is effective enough to enable us to meet the kind of coverage, that very high coverage that we needed to meet. So we had to come up with new policies. We had to come up with policies to be able to look at new strategies that would enable us to achieve this objective. Of course, one of the issues that we had to introduce was direct community engagement, which worked very well for us and which enabled us to achieve our objective. And one thing that I must state, even as I spend a little bit more time on community engagement, is that it was very important for us as a matter of policy to ensure that there was a robust involvement of stakeholders in the advocacy efforts. So there were also many other areas apart from community engagement, safety and efficacy. We had to look at regulatory approval because we have a national regulatory body for pharmaceuticals, and it is the Pharmacy and Poisons Board of Kenya. So we had to seek approval. We had to align, drug procurement processes with the national regulations, quality and standards. Then there was also the issue of logistics and drug supply, because this is a new kind of molecule that we were introducing. So we had to review the whole supply chain management system to accommodate the new regimen. And also we had to conduct a very proper, elaborate forecasting and quantification exercise just to ensure that we did not run out of stock before we finished the process, or we did not have wastage because of a very huge surplus. So we had to really tweak our policies just to ensure that that was taken care of. A very important area where we had to look at the existing policies was around the treatment strategy. And this one, again, we relied a lot on the existing data, and it involved mainly looking at the frequency, which was once a year, the frequency of administration, and then the duration, which was 2 years. And I am happy to report that with that, we were able to really roll out a successful campaign, because when we came back, we realized that that duration and frequency was sufficient. Another very important thing was to appreciate the fact that we have different kinds of populations. We have urban, rural, nomadic populations. So we really had to look at strategies that would accommodate all these people. And that actually came along with a lot of policy adjustments. Now, obviously, we really had to look at how to tweak our monitoring and evaluation framework to accommodate this new regimen. And this also involved coming up with a data utilization plan so that we can be able to measure impact. Another very important area was the adverse event reporting. So we came up with a new mechanism for reporting and managing adverse drug events. And we also had to train healthcare providers to respond to these adverse drug reactions. Whether they are suspected or they are real adverse drug reactions, we have to come up with a whole policy on how to ensure that we pick them up and we manage them in good time. Now, the other area was integration with other health programs, which have either a similar mandate or overlapping mandate. And mainly there was the malaria control program, as well as the pharmacovigilance department in the Pharmacy and Poisons Board, which was very critical in enabling us to roll along with the safety and efficacy issue. Of course, we had to come up with a budget, and then we looked at our funding portfolio. We had to map the funding sources to ensure that we have sufficient support, especially from the donors. And of course, this we had to bring it onto the policy table just for endorsement. Data security and privacy is another area that we looked at. We looked at the existing laws, the existing regulations, the existing guidelines, so that we had to now ensure that whatever we are doing is aligned to the existing laws and regulations. Now, another important policy area was around sustainability, because now we are looking at elimination in 2 years. How are we going to sustain the gains? And it involved coming up with quick policies which were to be developed on how we can transition from the mass drug administration approach to a surveillance and response approach that is integrated into the broader public health system. Now, finally, there was also other issues that we had to consider, so that we came up with policies, or maybe tweaked policies that are already existing around collaboration with the partners, especially non-governmental organizations, international organizations like the World Health Organization, around this new regimen. How are we going to leverage this, and other stakeholders as well? I have already talked about the data protection in terms of legislation and regulations, but we also had to look at the larger legislative arena and the policy arena, just to ensure that the whole strategy for triple therapy is aligned. And there was also an element, very important, of education and training, where we had to retrain our community drug distributors, our health care providers on these LF and other, LF, generally administration of the IDA, as well as a proper administration of the same to be able to achieve the kind of results that we wanted to achieve. So this, I can assure you, ladies and gentlemen, was a very exciting experience, personally having participated in it. And so it is something that I am very happy to share. And I hope that you've been able to pick out quite a bit from it. So I'll end at that point and wish you very fruitful deliberations moving forward. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, and that brings us to the end of my presentation.
Okay, so we've reached the end of the first part of the presentations. I'm wondering if there's any questions. We have a roving microphone. Anyone has questions for our first three speakers at least, or comments to make about the acceptability research examples that you've already heard about. Anyone? Not at this stage. We have one, thank you.
Thank you for these great presentations. In qualitative research, and especially when you're looking at acceptability, how do you ensure that there is no researcher bias or an investigator bias to not bias your entire findings on which you would then move forward?
Alison, you'd like to take that one?
There's a lot of qualitative researchers in the room, so now I feel nervous looking at Laura and Margaret here. So it's the way you build the methodology. So it's the way you frame your questions, for example, so that they're open. You're trying not to lead in your questions. I think so it's in the development of the study. I think who you identify as your enumerators are really important. So you don't want to ask a nurse to be the one who asks questions about, do you like this treatment, because they're not the right person. So I think the identification also of who. And then I think also, it's always recommended to trial your topic guide first, to just see what kind of information does it give, and also learning from that process before you finalize it. Those would be three that I would bring out. I don't know if you have some more you want to add. I'll give it to my senior colleague here.
No, just to add, you saw from the methods I showed that we didn't just zip in and zip out. The ethnographic immersion was a whole period of, I think, 8 weeks, just right at the initial stages, where we lived in the villages trying to understand the context in the communities. And then following that, each wave we went, we spent not less than 4 weeks in the place trying to understand. So we kind of became like a part of the community. And even if they were pretending in the beginning, by the time we were leaving, they felt that we were part of the community.
Maybe as a follow-on to that, I was just going to ask Alison to comment on the 9-point scale that you've talked about. Validation of that using different languages, is it understood the same way across cultures and languages?
Yeah, so we went through a very detailed process because we used it simultaneously in 5 countries. So we went through a very complex process to translate it and back translate it. And we didn't just translate it and back translate it, but we had actually 3 different people who were engaged in each country. And then when we rolled it out, we then made small changes, and we kind of were the central ones to ensure that if a change was made here, did it align with how it was going to be used in the other countries. So it was very controlled to ensure that that we had the same meaning across the 5. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Have a question here, thank you.
Thank you. My name is Wim van Brakel. I work with NLR, based out of the international office in Amsterdam. We've we work on leprosy, and I've been involved in studies trying to implement this post-exposure prophylaxis for leprosy, basically preventive chemotherapy for contacts of patients. So for the last 10 years or so, and we've done a lot of similar work. And I was wondering, I'm not a social scientist, so from a, say, social science conceptual point of view, we've tried to look at acceptability on the one hand and feasibility, and how does that relate to each other if you look at it from a professional point of view. So I don't know who can best answer that, but and we've done perception studies to understand how people view leprosy and how the community views leprosy to sort of in preparation, and we've done acceptability, also mixed methods always, to look at what people thought of interventions. But that relationship, say, between feasibility and acceptability keeps bugging me.
Oh, go up there. I'm getting yelled at to go here. Okay, so we get seen. Not yelled at. It was a silent yell with the pointing. It's a good question. In some of the literature, you see acceptability as woven into feasibility research. So sometimes you see that. In the work that we've done, we've separated acceptability and feasibility, and I've interpreted the feasibility as being more in the use of the tool, whatever it may be. How feasible is it? So that can also, so I've looked at it more from a delivery perspective, and the acceptability being more at the community side. That's how we've interpreted that, but sometimes in the literature you'll see that acceptability is actually a subset of feasibility research, so you'll see that sometimes. We kind of separated it out a little bit. And there's obviously feasibility questions that come into acceptability. How easy is it for someone to take a treatment or to go get a vaccine, for the 4th time in the malaria example. So there's some overlap, but in our work we kind of tried to separate them a little bit. I don't know if others want to add.
Any other questions? Yes, Chris.
Yeah, I want to follow up on that same question about viability or accuracy of the responses. I'm just thinking again in this situation in Papua New Guinea where we asked people, did you take the drug? And they said yes on the questionnaire. I don't know how it was done, but then when we came back again and quizzed them individually more detailed, 8 out of the 10 people said, no, I didn't really take the drug. And then they said that I felt social pressure, I should have taken it, but I didn't want to admit that I didn't take it. So how do you get around something like that?
Sounds like the qualitative research really was the key piece there.
Of course, you had worm data, so you could say, I know you didn't take it. Exactly. You were in a unique position. I think it's a good question, and I think with all of these methods, and I think Margaret probably just gave a hint of hers, and certainly with our research, I think there's the value in the triangulation. So you really do try to have multiple methods so that your survey may show one thing, but maybe you have, and we've just highlighted a few of the qualitative methods. There are so many methods that can be used, and I think there's a huge value in that triangulation to try and understand your data. But I would also argue there needs to be increased partnerships with researchers like yourself, and I think that's been a real benefit in the work that I've had with the DOLF team, is they're clinicians and parasitologists, and so they say, hey, look, there's a big worm burden here, what's going on? And I can help inform the questions that they're going to ask, and they can help to inform my understanding of things as well. So I think we need more partnerships like that, where it's not the social researchers over here and the clinical people over here, or the drug developers over there. We need to be working in more multidisciplinary teams so that we can share and feed off of each other. I think it makes for richer findings.
No, absolutely. Thank you. Any other burning questions, or we might just move to the break? Sabina.
Just a quick comment, and it fits really nicely to what you just said, because I'm really happy to be in the picture.
for the online audience.
So I think this is super important. And from a drug developer's perspective, what you said, Margaret, I'm amazed that you said that actually an injection is accepted, because we have in the drug developers community huge discussions, and most of the people saying, oh no, it's not acceptable at all. And you need to know this basically at the point of POC. After that, it's really difficult to change, and it will cost a lot of money. So we need to know as early as possible.
Absolutely. Great. And on that note, we might now move to having a break. But before we do, there's a question to the audience to think about. If we talk about social research to support country adoption of new interventions, what are the key words that come to your mind? And we'd like participation from in the room as well as online. On the screen, it says go to your internet browser and type in menti.com, and then you enter this code that's on the screen, 89950216, and add your comments, your words of in response to the question there. And we'd love to hear your thoughts and perspectives on that. So over the break, it would be great if you could do that. We may have another question for you when we come back. I'll leave it at that one for the minute. So we might get underway again now. So hopefully, particularly those that are online, have taken note of the code to get into menti.com and add any comments that you feel are relevant to the social research that might support country adoption of new technologies. We're going to move on to the next two speakers now. The first is Ashley Preston from the Pediatric Praziquantal Consortium, and she's sent us a video, and then followed by Sabina Specht in person. So we'll move on now over to the technology.
Hi, I'm Ashley Preston from Unlimit Health, and I'm representing the Pediatric Praziquantal Consortium. And today I'm presenting on the ADOPT research program, which is preparing for the introduction of a potential new pediatric treatment option for schistosomiasis in preschool-aged children. And unfortunately, there was a clash with timing with another session in the conference, so I'm recording this, but I am actually here in person at the conference if you do want to find me for any questions. So just to give a bit of background on the Pediatric Praziquantal Consortium, it was founded in 2012 and has a large number of different partners across different sectors, as you can see on the slide, and is also working in close collaboration with the Ministries of Health of Kenya, Uganda, and Cote d'Ivoire. So the vision of the consortium is to reduce the global disease burden of schistosomiasis by addressing the unmet need in infected preschool-aged children, including infants and toddlers. And the mission is twofold. Firstly, on the development side, to develop and register a suitable pediatric treatment for schistosomiasis in preschool-aged children. And then secondly, for the access, to define an innovative mechanism for access to the new treatment option for endemic populations, and to have that access be equitable and sustainable. So as you may know, the current praziquantal formulation, the tablet's quite large, and it's also known to be quite bitter. So in the development of the new treatment option, these challenges were tried to be resolved. So you can see that in the image, it's a lot smaller size. It's also more precise dosing for preschool-aged children, and the bitterness has been reduced. And it can also be mixed in water to be taken as a solution. And importantly, it's stable in hot and humid conditions. And there is a plan for local manufacturing to make sure there's access in endemic countries. And the formulation, the new treatment options, now gone through clinical development successfully with favourable efficacy, safety and tolerability. And it's currently under regulatory review with European Medicines Agency, which should hopefully be completed by the end of this year. And if there's approval, to be followed by WHO pre-qualification. So now on the access side, there's a research project that's a 5-year implementation research started in 2021 and will run until 2025, focusing on 3 countries, Kenya, Cote d'Ivoire and Uganda. And this research is aiming to prepare for the introduction of this new pediatric treatment option in endemic communities once it's approved. And the research focuses on firstly identifying the facilitators and barriers to implementation and delivery, and using that information to inform effective development of social mobilization, communication and training strategies. Also to assess the existing delivery platforms that are available which reach preschool age children, to understand what would be effective to integrate with for effective delivery and to improve cost effectiveness for the delivery of the new treatment option. Also to quantify drug and funding needs and any safety requirements, and then to use all of the information that's collected to inform national and international policy updates and guidelines. So the research is being implemented in a staged approach based on data collection at baseline, and that will be used to inform then the strategy for a small scale pilot, which will be evaluated and used to then inform a larger scale implementation. And as you can see, the activities all interlink over the years in the image. So in the first couple of years, we've been focusing on collecting data to understand the knowledge and perceptions of acceptability of pediatric schistosomiasis and treatment. And that information is being used now in this year to inform the development of the strategy for social mobilization. We're also have been assessing the available platforms for the delivery of the treatment. And that's all information and preparation that's going to get us ready for the pilot in 2024. And then following this pilot, there'll be hopefully a larger scale implementation in 2025, and that's all pending regulatory approval. So pre-intervention, as I mentioned, there's been social science studies to understand knowledge, acceptability and perceptions on pediatric schistosomiasis and treatment. And that's been completed across all 3 countries, across different levels of target populations from the community level upwards, and has also involved mixed data collection, including interviews, focus group discussions and surveys. And across the 3 countries, you can see there are 2 or 3 sites in each country. And then where those sites are starred, it's actually where the phase 3 trial also took place in Kenya and Cote d'Ivoire. So obviously there was variations across the different sites and across the different countries in the results that were found, but just to give a high level overview. In general, there was awareness of schistosomiasis and also of its existence in children, but there tended to be a lack of knowledge concerning how it's transmitted and also how it can be prevented. Also, considering the existing exposure to the current formulation of praziquantel, there were concerns based on that on the side effects in particular. But even despite that, there was a high level of perceived acceptance for the new treatment option, which is good news. And then in terms of the feedback that we got in relation to preferences around sensitization of communities, they tended to prefer interpersonal communication, for example, with community health workers or community leaders. And then in terms of delivery, there was a preference for mass drug administration through door-to-door or by using community health workers. So this information is all being used to develop a social mobilization strategy. and also the toolkits to support that strategy. And this is a Ministry of Health-led process, but in close collaboration with the partners who collected the baseline data. And again, across the different countries, the strategies will vary according to the context, but in general, they start with advocacy at the higher levels to support buy-in from decision makers, and then also include sensitization at administrative levels to ensure that implementation is supported appropriately, and then to have social mobilization at the community level to encourage uptake, and also elements of health education for community and health workers. So once these strategies have been developed, the Ministries of Health are also developing tools and materials to support them. And that can include, for example, print media like posters, or scripts for interpersonal communication during meetings or for town criers. And all of these tools, for some Ministries of Health, require pre-testing before they can be piloted, and that's to ensure that they are acceptable and culturally sensitive. So the pre-test will also be used to update all of the tools and materials and messages ready for the pilot. And then after the pilot, the results from that will be used to inform and update, again, ready for the larger scale distribution. There's also been work that's gone into assessing the different available platforms in the countries for the delivery of the treatment option to preschool age children. So an options appraisal tool was developed and used across the countries, and a different set of criteria was used to assess which of the platforms would be potentially most effective in the different contexts. So there was a series of in-country workshops held in each country that was used to finalize that platform selection, and also to develop implementation protocols for the small-scale pilots. In each country, 2 platforms have now been selected, which will be piloted for the distribution of the new treatment option. And these will be assessed based on the feasibility, the costs, the coverage of the target populations, and also the acceptability. And this will be used to inform the selection of the most promising platform, which will then be scaled up in 2025. So we're currently in the process of finalizing all of the implementation protocols in preparation for the pilot, and finalizing the tools required to support that for advocacy and social mobilization, and also everything required for monitoring and evaluation, and getting the ethical approvals in place. And that's in preparation for then the pilot, which will be conducted in 2024, pending regulatory approval, and then the scale up in 2025. So I'd just like to finish by thanking all of our partners and also all of our funders, and in particular for the ADOPT project, the EDCTP and GHIT. Thank you.
So hello everyone, and first of all I would like to apologize already in advance, because I'm a filarial person, so if onchocerciasis slips out of my mouth, what I mean all the time is hot, because I'm going to talk on behalf of my organization, and I just need to, yeah, perfect. So this is actually work done by Olaf Valverde, Florent Mombeau, Wilfried Mutombo, and colleagues from the NDI, with lots of support across organizations, funders, etc. So let's start, and what we wanted to present today is a little bit the learning that we had from the introduction of fexinidazole. So I don't want to go a lot into sleeping sickness, but just to remind, we have a first stage, the early stage, which is a little bit difficult to diagnose because it has not so clear symptoms, and then you have a later stage, a second stage, that is affecting actually the brain. So you have neuropsychiatric disorders as well as endocrinological symptoms. And for that, I will start with basically where we start, or at the time point of starting the fexinidazole development. So pentamidine was there for the early stage, and you had for the late stage, and keeping in mind that for the late stage you always need to get through the blood-brain barrier, which is important, and it's for drug developers, of course, a very critical part of the development, because this is always associated with adverse events. So what did we have on the ground? Milasoprol, that was introduced in 46, but it does have toxicity, so it's not easy to apply. It has to be applied multiple times for multiple days in a hospital. Then later on, eflonitine came onto the scene. It's also not yet optimally tolerated, still needs to be injected. And later on, NECT, which is a Nifortimox eflonitine combination, came on the scene, and that requires a shorter treatment duration, but still an injection, and I'll get back to that. The first thing I wanted to do is, look a little bit at the timelines. I will skip all of that on the left side. Who's interested, there is in Trends in Parasitology a very nice review on this. But for today's talk, I think one of the important things is the visibility of the disease, which is linked to how the perception in the communities is. And this is the case for DRC that got independent in 1960. So before that, there was a quite strong control of HAT. And it was then treated either with Suramin in the beginning, Milasoprol, etc. But when the country independence came, these control measures just stopped. And slowly HAT was reintroduced in several of the communities. So at this time, it was really on a low level, and it was also considered as of low importance, basically. Then you had new conflicts, you had challenge of building strong health system, etc., and all of that left the HAT cases to rise. And in the 2000s, the WHO recognized this and made a strong political push with introducing of the HAT program, which basically consisted of, at that time, the NECT treatment to be introduced. And that means, together with not only the suppliers of Nifortimox and eflonitine, so that was Bayer and Sanofi, but also to implement structures to provide this treatment and provide the information on the disease. And that was complemented in 2005 with a HAT platform. And the HAT platform was founded in Kinshasa with a national program, the National Sleeping Sickness Program, key stakeholders, research centers, WHO, etc. And this was a very vital activity for several reasons. One being, on the one hand, it was recognized with a NECT treatment. We still need hospitalization, we still have injection, and the need for an outpatient treatment option was considered, and it was put together with all the stakeholders into a TPP. And for those of you who are familiar with the drug development, the TPP is really important. And coming back to Margaret's point, this is where you really define whether you have a black or white tablet, whether you have injectable or not, etc. On the other hand, this platform was very important for a second topic, which is strengthening the health structures and strengthening the health workers on the disease, how to provide the given treatment, etc. And we have had very good responses of health workers in the DRC. So this is, for example, a statement of the clinician or of the nurse in the one of the hospitals, that by doing actually the clinical trials, she was trained in good clinical practice, etc. And all of that complements altogether into something that is one of the key things: strong local health facilities that are able to diagnose the treatment, diagnose the patients, and give the appropriate treatment. And all of that led actually since 2018 actually that we have less than 1,000, stably 1,000 recorded cases of HAT. And I will just skip this because this is a drug developer slide. And I'll talk a little bit because the HAT program at DNDi went together with colleagues into the communities, and alongside the implementation of the clinical trials, also interviewed and looked at the situation that we have. So on the one hand, the screening is very crucial, and that was with HUD, and as you know, the cases are not really numerous. So mobile teams needed to go into the communities to really look at the cases that are there. Passive screening by people coming to the health centers was also considered. And it is important to have the community involved, to have the community informed how to do surveillance, that you have really early detection, treatment compliance needs to be triggered, and I will get back to that in HUD we have a lot of issues with the stigma, social stigma, financial stigma, etc., that is connected to that. These active and passive forms are super important. A second thing that really was important for paving the way to take up fexinidazole was the treatment is offered free of charge, and that was with NECT through Bayer and Sanofi the case. And together with WHO, this was removal of a major obstacle here. And what is also important is, in general, to have a good knowledge on the disease, and that's across the communities, across the patients. So first of all, how do you diagnose? And in the past, including up to the neck treatment, we needed a lumbar puncture in order to differentiate whether it's a stage 1 or stage 2. This requires, of course, specialized health workers, including the treatment, keeping in mind nectar has to be injected, and at the end of the day also the awareness of vector control, so especially tsetse traps are quite helpful. And I apologize already for the small writing, but what are factors that are actually influence the HUD-related behaviors of the community? And we identified, and that really reflects what has been said before, that you have really 3 different levels. You have the individual level, you have the community level, and you have the societal level. So individual level, you have your personal situation, and that may be that you suffer symptoms, then you are, in case you are a woman, you're more likely to go to a health center. And as we had the case for Indonesia for Aleph this morning, it's maybe not that clear for men to seek support. And the second point is perception of HUD itself. So there's a lot of either personal experience, that you go mad, that you go crazy, that something happens to you that's not normal. So this is a big thing. You have a gender bias. Also here, the females are more likely to seek support and to get tested before they achieve symptoms. And you have, of course, an age-related aspect here. Age meaning that if the prevalence is low, the younger generation is not aware of the diseases and how to treat the disease, how to be diagnosed, etc. Then on the community level, you have also several aspects. You have a mistrust in the social service health providers. That is, for example, mobile teams may inject other diseases, etc. This is something to be aware of. You have then pure logistical facts, that if you go to a treatment center, you need to pay the transport there, you need to or you need to reimburse your absence from the family, etc. Your loss of income, basically. And all of that is really triggered when the endemicity is low. Everything becomes more difficult, and I foresee that in all of the NTDs that we're talking about. If the endemicity is low, or if the disease symptoms coming from onchocerciasis, we do not have that many cases of blindness anymore. The perception of the disease and the problems associated are very low. You need local leadership to really make the community aware of this disease, and if they don't all pull on the same string, then it's an issue. And in the case of HUD, we have observed also power imbalances, so everybody blames the other part, and that's between the health workers, the communities, and the Ministry of Health. So this is something also to keep in mind. And the society level basically also reflects a little bit the individual levels because it's linked. And that is the negative perception, your social expectations, bearing children, etc. That's also linked to treatments and what's told about treatments. And yeah, last but not least, your policies need to be aligned. So you need the engagement of the national programs, of the ministries of health, and last but not least, the WHO. And since I'm reaching almost the end, 2 minutes, so the implementation of the access of fexinidazole was actually a 3-step process. And having in mind what was done before, that was on the one hand, you had already the provision of the NECT via a combination of WHO, the providers, you had the awareness of the disease, you had the mobile teams, you had the strengthened health structures, so all of that was there, which is important. When fexinidazole came onto the scene, the first thing to do was to select target countries, and 82% of the HUD cases were in DRC, so this was why DRC was selected. Then, in addition, Angola, South Sudan, and Guinea. And the WHO very much supported, based on a positive FDA and EMA opinion, they supported the authorization for use of fexinidazole in the countries. And that was triggered very early on in the process, even before we had the authorization. So alongside the phase 3, this process was triggered. Yeah, basically it says here. And the adoption of into the guidelines by the WHO was also alongside and very important. And yeah, the last thing I mentioned earlier is really this easy distribution because the pathways were already implemented, and that is also very, very crucial, thinking about the new drugs we have in other diseases to come up. And this system will hopefully also be used then to take up acosiberol. Difference between fexinidazole, it's a 10 to 14 days treatment. Acosiberol hopefully will be only a 1-day outpatient treatment. And all of this will help to take up new drugs. And I think I stop here because I get a nice, I'll stop.
Thank you, Ashley, in absentia, and to Sabina for those last 2 talks. Are there any questions for, well, at least for Sabina, about the fexinidazole program, or any other thoughts that come to mind in hearing about those 2 talks on FGS and not at this stage? Oh, up the back.
Yeah, thank you very much. So my name is Florence Wakesho from Kenya. I'm looking at the cost of investment. I think I work for the Ministry of Health, and I know costs is really a factor. And probably from the work that has been projected or has been shared up to date, what are the costs, implications, understanding that now you need to go to the communities to get them involved, vis-a-vis the usual that we do, implementing without probably getting the community perspective. So really just to have an insight towards that.
I won't even attempt to answer that, but Sabina may have a perspective, Alison and Margaret may have a perspective on that. And I think it has a lot to do with integration and actually what you implement. But Sabina, do you want to respond to that?
It's costly, that's what I can say. So we discussed a little bit with the HUD team what could have been improved, rethinking this whole process. And one thing was maybe we could work with less sites and be a bit more focal to have the power in one health system and go broader. But we don't have the positive control, so we can't say. But at the end of the day, I mean, again, it's a funder's support that's necessary here to enable the national programs to implement this. This is what will stay.
Margaret or Alison?
I mean, I guess my answer is not too different from what Sabine just said. I mean, it's research, funded research, and it has to be paid for to be able to get things done. But for the health system to be part of it, then we engage them, like I said. They are part of the process, developing the proposal, and the constant feedback that we give. So at every meeting that we know they are present, we go to give feedback. So there's no end of project dissemination for them to take up the results and use, but as we go along, anything that they need to pick up and change, they do. So for instance, when we came up with the issues about the misunderstanding about the eligibility criteria, immediately they came up with a video to the health workers to get them to understand properly what the eligibility criteria is. We didn't tell them to do the video, we just presented the evidence and they took it up. So somebody pays for the research, yes, but it depends on how you engage with the people at the ground to ensure that the results are taken up and used.
Any other questions for the panel?
I can maybe just add another comment. I think we have a lot of untapped opportunities as well by fusing, and I think we still need to do our homework after COVID, and that is across the NTD. I mean, we want to know where all of the diseases are in the countries, right? And maybe there's saving opportunities that we have not fully looked at.
Yes, certainly Alison presented, I think it was Alison, the continuum of clinical trials, pilot projects and the like, which are opportunities all along that development pathway, at least for new technologies that are coming to the fore, to consider the social impact research component, which perhaps we haven't done so well in the past and need to consider more, particularly thinking about the end users and those that are going to be delivering the technology, whatever it is. So I think we're going to move now to some more active involvement in this. So we have another question for the audience, so particularly for those online who are not able to participate in the round poster discussions, to feedback to us on what you think the social research to support community adoption, the new technology would be, that what words come to your mind. And there's a different code here on the screen. 7356 1800, and I'll leave that up there just for a moment before we move to talking about how the room will break up. The online participants, there'll be a hold on the discussion, and then we'll come back online a little bit later, if I'm correct on that. So if you just take down the code first, and then we'll move on to the small group discussions. So, we have several questions that I shared with you at the beginning, and we're going to be looking at barriers to implementation of new technologies, both at the policy and more sort of macro level of an introduction of a new technology, but also barriers to introductions at community level. And you've heard many examples of things that have been found as part of social research or uncovered as a result of that. And then secondly, we're going to look at what are the possible solutions or innovative ways that we could overcome some of those barriers. We're reaching towards the end of our session. It's been some really great conversations about the barriers and the potential solutions. And so I might ask the three group leads, if you wouldn't mind just giving a summary of some of the key things that you discussed in your group and share with others. I think we had two groups that were mostly focused on the country adoption and others on more local adoption, but you may have covered both. So I might start with Barbara's group. Is Margaret? Oh, that's fine. We might start down there with Alison then.
So we focus more local level actually in our group. We have a list of barriers here, lack of knowledge knowledge, thank you, sorry about that. Lack of knowledge about the new intervention of the technology, cultural beliefs, sort of overall health literacy that may be low. Also the value add of a new technology over what's status quo, so understanding that can be a barrier. Lack of community ownership prior to the rollout. Certainly for the NTDs, they're often not the diseases of priority in a community. And so also past experiences with programs and also missed opportunities to learn from the experiences of other programs in terms of rollouts of new technology. We talked about the narrative around the disease that exists in the community and a lack of understanding of that. So perhaps there's low perceptions of its importance, of the risk, and the impact of the disease. Another barrier more at the health system level around financing to support the rollout of new technologies and what that requires. I'm trying to go quickly. A lack of expertise or quality of data to support that can create a barrier. And we also talked about matching the intervention to the existing country capacity and ensuring that those are together. And then finally, health workers can be a barrier in their own right, reluctant to change. So we thought of 4 innovative ways to think about this. The first one is using photo voice to help understand that community narrative about disease and their perceptions about and trying to capture that. The second one was around, we weren't sure exactly which barrier, but I put it in with health literacy, but using big data, and it's not going to be relevant in every situation, but what are the search terms that are being put out on the computer, in big data and AI to understand, are there certain trends and questions that people are asking? And that won't be relevant in all contexts, but in some contexts it may be, particularly if a new intervention is rolled out, are there certain questions that are turning up on the search engines? The third one was an idea called asset mapping. And we use this to understand who local influencers were. So mapping what are the assets in the community in terms of existing platforms, cultural events, et cetera, that could be used to maximize communication and trust. And then finally, we had some discussion around innovations to improve trust and communication, things like community-led monitoring, patient support groups, identifying a focal point who can answer questions in the community. So those were some of the ones we talked about. Thank you. It's a good discussion.
Thanks, Alison. Great discussion there. Barbara. Oh, Sabina, maybe. Sabina's group.
Okay.
And Elena.
So we talked about the barriers to country adoption, and we had like 14 barriers. Starting with the regulatory, then the funds, like the money itself, but also the cost effectiveness, potential analysis or for the implementation itself, the alignment with country priorities. So that what we are trying to do is align nationally with the ministries of health, with the country. The timing, so if we're talking about an intervention that it's taking like 5 years and you don't have the results until late, so this is also related, and you will not have so much political willingness if the timing is so long. The physical geographical barriers, so it's not the same talking about a country that is big than a small country, or even in a small country if there are difficult to reach populations. Then the existing or potential fragile health system that the country already has. The trainees or how can we translate the knowledge to the people or to the populations that might use the test, the political commitment, then communities' perceptions and acceptability, the adoption at the community level and the way that we communicate the information, trust, and we can talk about trust about the test itself, but also about the healthcare system and more in general. Then the culture norms and how we need to adapt to be context-specific into the culture, and the previous experiences with this diagnostic or something that it's that reminds them or a previous experience. So when we're talking about barriers to country adoption and we were talking about money, we were thinking about participatory action research that could be used with multidisciplinary teams, talking also with social scientists, but also health economists, to try to incorporate the voices of the people, and also case studies. So learning from other examples from other countries, how they used this tool, and how can we learn from the good experiences. Then talking about adoption at the community level, the creation of tools that could be used or that have been used in another context, and that the people could directly adopt them and use them. And it's important here, the mapping to identify the key populations or the missed populations that are not being diagnosed. And then about trust, again, is basically repeating some of the things that we've been thinking about, mapping these key populations and how to connect with them. Is very similar to the adoption at the community level, and very important to include local stakeholders to be engaged since the beginning. And when we were talking about these two, we would also be mentioning that we need to adapt the methods where we communicate the information. So we were talking about doing videos and having influencers doing awareness and showing a diagnostic tool through TikTok or social media. So these are tools or new ways that we can test or that we can incorporate in a social sciences study to see if they are working. Thank you.
Thanks, Elena.
I don't know if someone from the group wanted to talk, otherwise I will attempt to report back. So we had the same initial question about barriers to country adoption and policy change. There's a lot of common trends between, or common thoughts between the two groups. I think I will, for example, we mentioned there's different levels in which a decision needs to be made within the healthcare system, and that could be an issue because you need to have engagement at all those levels. Other mentioned the fragmentation actually of the healthcare system, and that makes it difficult to have a bit of a common understanding of priorities. We also mentioned the regulatory process. We mentioned the funding that can be an issue, and sometimes the fact that NTDs are not necessarily the really high priority. I think the one that are a little bit different is maybe, or even though you mentioned it as well, but from a country level, or the decision maker at a country level are not necessarily involved as the study or as the studies are being developed, or when the intervention is being developed. Therefore, they may have less buy-in, or it will take longer to convince them to get on board. Another one was maybe the lack of involvement of the professional medical association, and therefore can lead to some diverging opinion that could lead to again, need to emphasize, or you need a longer time to convince. We also highlighted the media, the role of the media that can really have a negative impact on the country adoption and policy change. And then we also mentioned which goes back to the priority part, is the fact that you have so many conflicting priorities, and you have also natural disaster and conflicts that it's a bit the NTDs and the intervention are a little bit diluted in the middle of all of that. And the other barriers, strength of evidence on risk and benefit. So the case is not, the business case is not strong enough to really, or didn't incorporate all the elements that will convince or that will support country adoption. in terms of innovation, we spent quite a bit of time discussing about the role that could take some champion in NTDs, and maybe looking at what happened in the HIV space or the TB space. They have been quite successful. I think Margaret shared the fact that close to, or just before the year 2000, they brought a patient with LF just so that to Geneva, just so that they will gain more support from funders and a renewed commitment in the program. So using champion or celebrities to support that effort. Another part we spend a bit of time talking about is how can we better learn. And it's not really innovative, but it's maybe more saying that we are not using it enough, is some work being done by other countries. How can we learn, and how can we better communicate, better disseminate the experience of the other country for all the different levels, from the regulatory process, but also from some of the successful intervention that were put in place. And then there's also how can we look again at digital communication, use dashboard or use maps to communicate, use social media, and especially go back to local language context media. So make sure that it is adapted to the environment. Did I miss anything? No? Okay.
Great, thanks, Barbara. Well, look, that was such a rich conversation. Everyone's contributions are fantastic. There's a huge diversity of, obviously, barriers, but also potential ways to address these barriers through social research, both the more formal kind that perhaps run for specific purposes, such as the WHO guidelines, but also could be built with the right sort of simple frameworks into ongoing programs in order to assess the continued acceptability and other factors of it influencing how people perceive a new technology and continue to either use or take it or not, or uptake it in the first place. So I want to thank you all for your participation today. I think it's been a really valuable and interesting learning experience. I hope we have more conversations. It seems this was a big theme this year, talking about really engaging with the social research in order to understand how effective our programs are or can remain in the difficult circumstances that they're often rolled out in. So thank you. I think we have to go back to the plenary now. So thanks again, and we'll see you all downstairs.